Hello, I'm Andy Sophia Fontaine, editor here at Iceland Review. With winter coming up, you might be thinking more about reindeer. If you like me and you love reindeer, we have a particularly heartwarming story for you coming up. We've got that and lots more on this episode of Iceland News Review. So I'm here at Iceland's Parliament because our lead story today is about the upcoming elections in Iceland on November 30th. So to get into this though, I wanted to give you a very simple breakdown of how these things work in this country. So Iceland actually has a lot of political parties for such a small country. We're about, close to 400,000 people, and yet there are 10 separate political parties in the running for the elections this year, 6 of whom are already in Parliament. Now, we have 6 voting districts. There's 3 for the greater Reykjavik area, and there's 3 for the countryside. So that sounds like a fair division, right? 3 for the city, 3 for the country. But bear in mind that about 2/3 of the country lives in the greater Reykjavik area. It's a little bit controversial, and the way they divide the seats between these different districts is extremely complicated. We won't go into that, but that's basically it. 10 political parties, 6 voting districts. So each party draws up a list of candidates that are going to be running in each of these districts. And when you go to vote, what's really interesting is that you don't vote for individual candidates. You vote for a party. So when you go into the voting booth for your district, you'll have a choice of which party you want to vote for along with their list of candidates. Well, what if I don't like all the candidates on the list, you might be thinking. A really funny thing you can do is cross out the name of a candidate that you don't like. Like if you want to vote for this party but you don't like this person, cross them out. A historical note though, this practice has so far not had any effect on the election results, but it's something that you can do if you want to vote more exactly in tune with your conscience. Now, the fun isn't over yet though, because once the votes are tallied and through a very complicated mathematical process, they determine how many of each party get how many seats in Iceland's 63-seat parliament. Then we have to have a new government. And this is where things get a little bit chaotic, because this is actually not decided by some election board or something like that. It is up to the individual parties to meet together and talk together about what they agree on, what they disagree on, what they can compromise on, to try to form an agreement. And these are typically parties that combined would have a majority in Parliament that make these talks. And this can take days, it can take weeks, it can take even longer than that. And once this is done, once we have 2 or more parties that are like, okay, these are the platform points that we can agree on, we have enough seats combined to form a majority, we're ready to form a government, then they go to the president for approval, and that's typically just a formality. So that's basically how it works. And with all this in mind, how are the parties doing right now? Well, the latest polls are out, and the Social Democratic Party, which is a center-left party, they've been at the top of the polls since January 2023, and they're still at the top. But an interesting new wrinkle is that in the past couple of weeks, the Reform Party has just been rocketing up the polls, and they're virtually tied right now with the Social Democratic Party. If elections were held today, the Social Dems would have 16 seats, the Reform Party would have 15, and if you can do simple math, that's 31 seats. So it's almost a 2-party majority, but not quite. So where does that leave the other parties that are in the running? Well, the Independence Party, if elections were held today, would win 10 seats. The Center Party, which is actually a right-wing party, they would win 11 seats. The People's Party, which is kind of I don't even know they're probably the only real centrist party. They would win 6 seats, and the Progressive Party, which is a center-right party, would win 5 seats. So no other party, though, is polling high enough to win a seat yet. There's a couple, such as the Pirate Party and the Socialist Party, who are just on the edge of the 5% threshold. And if elections bear out, if the polls bear out in these elections and we get roughly the same numbers, then it would basically be up to the Social Dems and the Reform Party to have their pick of the litter in terms of what third party to bring on to form a coalition government. But anything can happen, and we're not 2 weeks away, no, wait, 3 weeks away and change? 3 weeks away from Election Day, and that's an eternity in politics, as you know. Anything can happen, so we'll just have to wait and see, but we will keep you updated as events arise. In more fun news, the Iceland Airwaves Music Festival is currently ongoing, featuring bands not only from Iceland, but from all over the world. This is one such venue, NASA, where these bands will be performing. People from all over the world love to come here to discover new acts, and it's always a great time, and we will be covering Iceland Airwaves on our Instagram, so be sure and tune in for that. In other news, whale hunting. So we have a caretaker government right now, okay? Like last October 13th, the Prime Minister, Bjarni Benediktsson, announced that he was breaking up the coalition and that there's going to be new elections. We already covered that there's elections coming up. So in the meantime, there's a caretaker government, and this government is typically not expected to make any huge decisions. You know, they're just to have a government pretty much to occupy the seats. But there is one big decision that is currently on the desk of the government, and the Prime Minister has been very cagey about whether or not he's actually going to take action on it, and it's regarding whale hunting. You see, Hvalur HF, which is Iceland's last operating whale hunting company, they submitted an application for a whale hunting license that would basically be indefinite. And as it turns out, Bjarni Benediktsson is not only Prime Minister right now, but he's also acting Minister of Fisheries. His special advisor to this ministry is another Independence Party MP by the name of Jón Gunnarsson. And this is a really interesting choice because you might remember the fin whale hunting ban of June 2023, when then Minister of Fisheries Svandís Svavarsdóttir issued what has now been ruled an unlawful fin whale hunting ban. It was temporary, it only lasted the summer, but one of her most vocal critics of this decision was none other than Jón Gunnarsson. And so there's been some worries that this application, had a certain kind of timing to it, considering the people who are in charge of it. And so the question's been asked, is this license going to be approved or not? Well, a coalition of grassroots organizations, including but not limited to Stop Whaling in Iceland, the Icelandic Environment Association, the Icelandic Nature Conservation Association, the Icelandic Vegan Society, the Icelandic Animal Welfare Society, and the Youth for Environmental Conservation, have all implored the president to use her power to try to stop this application for being approved during this government, because it's a caretaker government, they're saying, and the caretaker government has no business making such a big decision. And Bjarni Benediktsson has been very cagey about whether or not he's going to approve this application. He's been like, maybe I will, maybe I won't. But another minister in this government, Willum Þór Þórsson, who's the Minister of Health for the Progressive Party, he recently on TV said that he does not expect that the government is going to make this decision, but it's still very up in the air. Anything can happen within the next 3 weeks. It might be approved, it might not, the license to hunt whales might be approved, it might not be. We'll just have to see. So this is the new area of Parliament. These are some other parliamentary buildings. It looks very warm and inviting, doesn't it? In any event, our next story is about a little thing known as Fit to Fly certificates. So, the Association of General Practitioners, specifically the chair, Margrét Ólafía Tómasdóttir, recently told the press that she was going to implore all the doctors within this association to stop issuing Fit to Fly certificates for people that the government wants to deport. So, a Fit to Fly certificate is given out for any number of reasons. You might associate it with COVID-19. It's basically a medical certificate that you present to an airline to say that you are indeed healthy enough to get on an airplane and fly someplace. Within this context, however, what we're talking about is the practice of the government where there's somebody that they want to deport. The deportee says that they are not medically fit to fly, and so immigration authorities have a doctor come and examine them and issue or not a certificate saying that this person is fit to be deported from the country. And the most recent example of this being used was the case of Yazan Tamimi, who's an 11-year-old boy from Palestine who has Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. And their family was contending, he's in very bad health. He cannot get in an airplane and be deported. But a doctor examined him and said, yes, he's fit to fly. Well, that family was not deported. They have residency in Iceland, which is very good. But the head of the General Practitioners Association has objected to doctors even conducting these examinations, let alone issuing these certificates, because in her mind, this is a violation of the Hippocratic Oath. And you may be familiar with the very first statement in this oath, which is first, do no harm. She believes that issuing these certificates saying that the government may deport this person is a violation of that oath. And the Minister of Justice, Guðrún Hafsteinsdóttir, had some choice words to say about this, where she basically accused the head of the association of having this position for political reasons. And Margaret, the head of the association, in turn responded very definitively to this, saying absolutely not. And quoting her now, "It is utterly unconnected to politics and is based on the Hippocratic Oath that we swear to abide when we become doctors. It would be like demanding that doctors certify that it's all right for someone to get in a boxing match. This is simply asking for a certificate to send people into situations that threaten their lives. This is not a part of our job." So the association is asking for the government to redraft new regulations where this is concerned, and the government hasn't expressed any willingness to do this, but the Association of General Practitioners has said that they will just continue to refuse to conduct these examinations and refuse to issue fit-to-fly certificates. Speaking of flying, we recently got a press release from the Chinese embassy where they made this announcement that Icelandic passport holders can stay in China, do business, visit friends, do whatever you want for up to 15 days in that country without a visa, which is pretty big news, I would say. Furthermore, passport holders from Slovakia, Norway, Finland, Denmark, Andorra, Monaco, Liechtenstein, and South Korea will no longer need a visa. And that goes into effect today, and it is to last until December 31st, 2025. Getting to China is no easy task, but there are talks currently ongoing to have direct flights between Iceland and China, which would be pretty interesting to see. Now, I'm not sure how many Icelanders would take up the government on this offer of going to China to visit, but there are a lot of Chinese tourists who come to this country, and I'm sure that they're going to be very delighted with this news as well. Okay, so no episode of Iceland News Review would be complete without some animal stories, and we've got two animal news stories for you. First of all, goats. Yes, there's a specific breed of goat, the Icelandic goat, that you might be familiar with. We've visited the goat farm on Háafell before, and right now there's a medical issue that has come up regarding them, and that's about Scrapie. Scrapie is a highly contagious neurological wasting away disease that has no cure. This is has been especially a problem in Icelandic sheep, where like if one sheep is found to have this disease, they typically cull the entire herd. So this had people engage in genetic testing to find sheep that have a Scrapie-resistant gene. And they have been able to find these sheep, and they're currently in the process of trying to breed a new stock of Scrapie-resistant sheep. But sheep are not the only animals who can have vulnerabilities to Scrapie, goats as well. And only 10% of the Iceland's goat population, which is about 2,000 goats, have been tested for whether or not they have this gene. And the thing that makes this kind of tricky though, is that testing for Scrapie in goats involves sending these samples overseas to Sweden. And that can take a long time, and it's expensive. And so Icelandic goat farmers are asking the government to provide funding for them to be able to do genetic testing on goats and Scrapie testing on goats here in Iceland. It would be much faster, it would be cheaper, and they may be able to reach a point like we have with our sheep, where we find Icelandic goats do have a gene that's resistant to Scrapie. The Norwegian goats do have such a gene, and they're very closely related to Icelandic goats, so there is hope. And fingers crossed that we can save our endangered goat population from this terrible disease. So I'm here in the garden behind Parliament. I imagine that if you're a member of Parliament, this is a good place to go and relax. When I was in Parliament, I never visited this place myself. Maybe I should have. But in any event, our last story today here in Iceland News Review is about reindeer. So last summer, we reported on a reindeer calf that was discovered in the mountains in East Iceland. And the calf was only 2 weeks old, mother nowhere to be found, and this reindeer calf was taken to Reindeer Park, which is a reindeer sanctuary in Eyjafjallajökull. And if you want to go and visit this park, you can. And if you do so, we highly recommend the sponsor of this episode, Blue Car Rental, which is linked in the description. In any event, so after this calf was brought in, they were caring for the calf because at 2 weeks, it's still nursing, it's still in the bottle. And they initiated a naming contest for this reindeer as well. Well, I'm happy to report that this reindeer calf is now thriving, and they named it. The name of this calf is now Reindier. It's a portmanteau of Reindeer, which is the Icelandic word for reindeer, and the feminine suffix dis, which is on the end of a lot of feminine names in Iceland, such as Eidís and Snædís. And dis itself comes from Norse mythology. The dis were like spirits. They're kind of comparable to the fates. And so Reindier, very clever name. And this reindeer, goes for daily walks around Eyjafjallajökull. And the person who runs Reindeer Park, Björn Magnusson, he was telling reporters that during his time in Lapland, he had learned that children have a really good effect on taming reindeer. And so he typically will invite along his next door neighbor, this 9-year-old girl named Camilla Arnarsdóttir, to accompany him on these walks and help the reindeer get acclimated. She's thriving, the reindeer, she's doing really, really well. And I don't know, I found it very heartwarming, because when the story came out last summer, was really hoping that she would be living her best life, and she apparently is. That's all we have for you today here on Iceland News Review. Remember to check out Blue Car Rental in the description below. We'll see you next week. Be good to each other.